Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at something that affects pretty much all of us. Self-control.
Right. And specifically, how we shake those habits we wish we didn't have.
Exactly. And forget the old idea that it's, all just about pure willpower.
Yeah, that whole moral weakness idea if you can't stick to something.
We're diving into some, well, pretty surprising science that shows our surroundings, our environment, plays a much bigger role than most people think.
It really does.
And get this. We're going to start by looking at, of all things, heroin addiction among U.S. soldiers during the Vietnam War.
Which sounds intense, but it actually tells us a lot about, say, biting your nails or procrastinating.
It's fascinating. So yeah, for a long time, the common wisdom has been it's all an internal struggle, right? A test of discipline.
Exactly. If someone struggles with, I don't know, overeating or smoking, we tend to judge their character.
But the research paints a very different picture. It highlights this powerful influence of, well, just where we are and what's around us.
So let's dig into that Vietnam story.
Okay, picture this. It's 1971. U.S. congressmen are over in Vietnam visiting the troops.
And they find something pretty alarming.
Yeah, they stumble upon this really disturbing statistic. Over 15% of the soldiers there were addicted to heroin.
Which is already high, but it got worse.
Right. Further digging actually pushed that number even higher. Something like 35% had tried it, and maybe up to 20% were actually addicted.
A huge crisis, which understandably led to action back home.
It did. The government set up the Special Action Office of Drug Abuse Prevention specifically because of this.
Now, this is where the really groundbreaking research comes in from Lee Robbins.
Ah, yes, Robbins' study. It completely flipped the script on addiction, didn't it?
Totally. Before her work, the prevailing thought was, heroin addiction. That's basically a life sentence, permanent.
You don't just get over it easily.
But Robbins found something astonishing. When these addicted soldiers returned to the U.S., their relapse rate was incredibly low.
Like, unbelievably low.
Get this, only about 5% relapsed within the first year. Just 12% within 3 years.
Wait, so 9 out of 10 soldiers who were addicted in Vietnam just stopped, almost immediately.
Pretty much, yeah. As soon as they got home, it was so different from what everyone expected. It forced researchers to really question everything they thought they knew.
Absolutely, because kicking heroin, you'd think that requires this huge, long battle.
Yeah.
So what was going on in Vietnam that caused such widespread addiction?
Well, the environment there was almost uniquely suited to it.
How so?
First, heroin was incredibly easy to get, cheap, pure, readily available.
Okay, access is key.
Then there's the constant, immense stress of war, a powerful trigger looking for a release or a coping mechanism.
Makes sense.
Plus, they were surrounded by other soldiers who were using. It kind of normalized the behavior.
Peer pressure or just shared experience?
Probably a bit of both. And crucially, they were thousands of miles from home, away from their families, their usual routines, their support systems.
All the normal anchors were gone.
Exactly. It was this perfect storm of factors that made starting and maintaining the habit much, much easier over there.
And then, poof, they fly back to the States.
And that entire context just vanishes. Suddenly, they're in a completely different world. None of those specific pressures, none of those cues are there anymore.
So the triggers disappeared.
Pretty much. The easy access, gone. The intense combat stress, gone. The specific social circle of users, mostly gone. That feeling of being totally displaced, replaced by being home.
And the habit just dissolved for most of them.
For the vast majority, yes.
Right.
Which is, a massive contrast to the typical story.
Right. You mentioned what usually happens. Somebody gets addicted at home, they go to rehab.
Which is an environment specifically designed to be free of triggers, right?
Sure.
Clean, structured, supportive.
But then they come back.
They come back to the same neighborhood, maybe the same friends, the same stresses, the same corner store where they used to buy cigarettes or whatever triggered their drug use. All of those original cues are waiting for them.
And that's why the relapse rates are usually so high. You said, what, like 90% sometimes?
Precisely. For heroin addiction treatment, historically, yes, relapse rates can be depressingly high, often cited around that figure. The old environment triggers the old behaviors.
So the Vietnam studies really threw a wrench in that idea that bad habits are just about weak willpower.
Absolutely. If something as powerful, as physiologically gripping as heroin addiction could be so drastically switched on and off by changing the environment, well, what does that say about our everyday habits?
Yeah, the ones that seem less intense, like mindlessly scrolling social media or eating junk food when stressed?
It makes you think, doesn't it?
I
And
bet.
this links up really well with more recent research, too.
You mean the stuff about people who seem to have amazing self-control?
Exactly. It turns out these folks aren't necessarily walking around with, like, iron wills constantly fighting temptation.
They don't have some internal superpower.
Not exactly. What's fascinating is when researchers looked closely, they found these people are often just better at setting up their lives to avoid temptation in the first place.
So they're designing their environment.
Precisely. They structure their days, their homes, their routines to minimize exposure to the things that would tempt them. They don't need to exert massive willpower all the time because the temptation isn't constantly in their face.
So the people with the best self-control often end up using it the least.
That's a great way to put it. It's more about smart prevention than constant battling.
That really clicks. And it makes sense biologically too, right? How habits get wired in.
Yeah, once a habit is encoded in your brain, it's like a program waiting to run. The cue, the trigger in the environment is what launches the program.
The brain goes on autopilot.
It does. Think about that story of Patty Allwell.
Right, the smoker.
Yeah, she'd quit smoking years, decades even. Totally done with it.
But
then years later, she got back on a horse, something she used to always do while smoking.
and boom.
And instantly that craving hit her like a ton of bricks. The cue riding the horse was still linked to the old habit deep down. It was just dormant.
Wow. It shows how persistent those connections are, even if you think you've beaten something.
Yeah. Incredibly persistent, which is why some common approaches to behavior change can actually backfire.
Oh, so? Like the scare tactic.
Yeah, exactly. Like shaming people about their weight, it might just increase stress.
Which then makes them want to comfort eat more. Vicious cycle.
Right, or showing smokers those graphic pictures of diseased lungs. It can cause anxiety.
And what do anxious smokers often do?
Reach for a cigarette to calm down. If you don't deal with the underlying cue or the reason why they started, you might unintentionally reinforce the bad habit.
It's almost like the habits feed themselves, isn't it?
They often do. They're sort of autocatalytic, as researchers might say. They create the feelings they're supposed to numb.
Feeling bad leads to junk food, which makes you feel worse, which leads to...
More junk food. Or feeling stressed leads to smoking, which offers temporary relief but doesn't fix the stress, maybe even adds health worries later.
And there's that cue-induced wanting thing, too, even tiny triggers.
Oh, definitely. It can be subconscious. There was that study you mentioned.
The cocaine one.
Yeah, where addicts were shown a picture of cocaine for just 33 milliseconds. Way too fast to consciously register, oh, that's cocaine.
But their brains still reacted.
Instantly. The reward pathways lit up, the craving sparked, all from a cue they didn't even consciously perceive.
That's kind of scary. It shows how automatic it is.
It really does. The big takeaway here is, once a habit pathway is burned into your brain, it's really, really hard to just erase it. It's always there, potentially waiting for the right cue.
Which explains why just white-knuckling it, just trying to resist temptation moment by moment feels so exhausting.
It is exhausting. Willpower, as we said, it's like a muscle. It gets tired. You can't rely on it 24/7, especially when your environment is constantly throwing triggers at you.
And you're basically fighting your own brain's wiring.
Exactly. And fighting your surroundings. It's
Yeah.
very hard to maintain positive habits consistently if you're stuck in a negative or triggering environment. The context usually wins in the long run.
Okay, so if brute force willpower isn't the sustainable answer,
Mm-hmm.
what's the smarter way?
The more reliable approach, the one suggested by all this research, is to cut the bad habit off at the source.
Meaning,
Meaning, reduce your exposure to the cues that trigger in the first place. Attack the root cause, not just the symptom.
okay, give me some practical examples.
Sure. If you procrastinate because your phone is always buzzing, well, when you need to focus, leave your phone in another room. Simple, but effective.
Right. Out of sight, out of mind, literally.
Or if scrolling through Instagram makes you feel jealous or inadequate, be ruthless. Unfollow the accounts that consistently trigger that feeling.
Okay, what else?
Watching too much TV late at night. Maybe take the TV out of the bedroom. That removes a huge cue.
I know people that struggle with that.
Or say you overspend on the latest gadgets because you're always reading tech reviews. Maybe stop reading the reviews for a while. Remove that trigger for desire.
Or video games. If you lose hours to them.
Unplug the console when you're done. Put it in a closet. Add a little friction. Make the cue less immediate, less obvious.
It sounds like you're basically making the bad habit invisible.
That's exactly it. It's the inversion of the first principle for building good habits, which is make it obvious. To break bad habits, you make it invisible.
And it's surprising how well just removing one simple cue can work.
It really is. That single change can sometimes cause the whole habit structure to just crumble over time without this constant draining fight.
So self-control in the moment, that's like a short-term Band-Aid.
It has its place, definitely. But it's not the long-term strategy. Long-term success really comes from shaping your environment so it supports your goals, not sabotages them.
Okay, let's wrap this up then. The big message here seems to be the secret to better self-control isn't just trying harder or having more discipline.
No, it's much more about being smart, being strategic about your environment.
Identifying those triggers, those cues, often things we don't even notice that kickstart the habits we want to break.
And then taking active steps to make those cues less apparent, ideally invisible.
We've seen how deep these habits go, how hard they are to truly forget.
And how people who seem to have amazing self-control are often just masters of avoiding temptation proactively.
And that removing cues, even simple ones, can be incredibly powerful.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, listening right now.
Yeah, think about one area in your life, just one habit you're wrestling with.
What's the specific thing that usually happens right before? What's the cue? Is it a time of day, a place, an emotion, seeing something?
Get really specific.
Yeah.
And then ask yourself, what's one small change, something you could do right now or today, to make that cue less visible, less obvious in your environment?
Just one small tweak. Remove the cookie jar from the counter, turn off notifications for that app, leave your work laptop in your bag when you get home.
Experiment with it. See what happens. As we've heard today, sometimes the simplest environmental changes can unlock the biggest shifts in our behavior, often more effectively than just trying to resist.